Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Like we say on this show, it all depends the time zone from where you are watching us from. Welcome to The Leader, courtesy of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, EAK, and Catalid on Hope Media. My name is Edmund Mudibo. Today's topic is one that many of us are aware of in terms of the subject matter, but always would hope and wish someone else spoke to it because you realize that speaks to me. And I'm very glad to have with us today Coach Paps Wanyugi. Coach Paps Wanyugi.
Yes, that's right.
Are you aware Olympics is going on? Coach, why are you not there?
Yes, I am, because I'm here.
So briefly, tell us, who is Coach Paps Wanyugi and what is that you do?
Yeah, so Coach Paps Wanyugi is a wellness and confidence coach. Those are the areas of my certification. I'm also a psychologist, and I'm an author of 2 books. One is Reconfidence, Get Your Ball Back, and Leading Generations, which is about mentoring 21st century preteens and teens in Africa. Yeah, and besides that, I am a mother of 4 and wife to Mr. James Wanyugi. Yeah, and I am so glad to be here. I'm also part of the CEOs Association, and that is how I am part of this.
Wonderful. Like we used to say, umetuma salamu kwa bwana wako.
Hey, nimetuma salamu kwa Mr.
Those are bonga
Wanyugi
points.
na watoto mkiwa pale nyumbani. Anyways.
Excellent. So now let's get into the subject matter. Leading your generation. Just what is leading your generation from where you sit? How would you unpack that?
I think for me, it's just understanding that we are passing batons, through every generation. Let's just say from Genesis, many batons passed on from one generation to another. And my responsibility, it's whether it's 400 meters, I'm actually doing my part well. And so that is how I lead my generations, by making sure when it's the relay and I get the baton, I do my best. And then that will enable the next generation to do their best, and the next generation to do their best. And so leading generation is understanding that series. And it comes from, first of all, appreciating the generations that were before, in terms of they did their best. Sometimes it's difficult for millennials who are really spunked, and of course Gen Xers, to imagine that their parents were doing their best, when they were harsh. But they were doing their best with what they had. That was their framework, that was their reference. And so when every generation does its best, then we keep on evolving and we get better, and that is how we are leading generations.
So then, we are in a community and multi-generational society, as it were, and we're in this space called the Earth Together. And so what then does it mean to be a generational leader?
Being a generational leader is, first of all, appreciating all the contexts. And so all factors held constant, I'm just thinking that I'm coming from somewhere and I'm also heading out to somewhere. And then I came from someone, and then someone will come out of me. Whether it's in the corporate space, whether it is in the family space, whether it is in ministry and vocation, to just understand that every day I'm living from a place of influence. And that is how generational leadership gets its framework and also its power and impact. And so when I think beyond myself and I step back from the frame, and I'm like, there's a whole picture to it. And I usually think about it from this context of, it's like we are actors on a stage. When your turn comes, you exit the stage, someone else comes in. And so we come from eternity, we go into another eternity. And then what I did when I was here then determines how much the others will get their energy and synergy from, because I did my part well. And so generational leadership has actually to do with, I see the big picture and I am playing for more than myself. I'm thinking about 100 years from now. And I'm just thinking that all the decisions I'm making right now, one day I'll not be here, but I will have influenced and impacted the ones who are here. And then you think about even Genesis and the family stories that are there, because there are so many families. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, and of course now Joseph will come. You can just see different generations playing out. And generational leadership is Abraham, with only one child, being able to build 12 tribes of Israel later, just from his obedience. In terms of, he was one man, he was initially barren, and probably looking almost impotent when you look at Hebrews 11. But then just by faith and following a God he probably didn't understand too well, because the Bible says he moved out by faith, then generations came out of him. And so generational leadership is that part of obeying on my part. And then God is the one who has the bigger picture. When I do my bit, everyone else finds their place.
And now I really appreciate, because you have a personal journey that really is one that many of us will really be able to connect with. From being a suicidal teen into where you are now in terms of now being a wellness coach and everything that you are in. What was it like? We're not condemning or anything, but just to connect and appreciate. Speak to the heart. Because we could be prescribing solutions of symptoms we are seeing, and yet we're not dealing with the core problem, which one could see from a personal perspective and community and even national. Dare suggest even we as a country, Kenya. How was it like for you?
Absolutely. And so, first of all, I really empathize with families, because I journey with families in my coaching work as a coach who works with women, preteens and teens, and of course also mentors who work with children. And so there's a lot of empathy in terms of, one day I was actually a suicidal teenager, and I was a 15-year-old, and I actually remember 27th December 1999. I was in Form 3. Everything was just against me. I had very poor grades. I had a D- Form 3 last term, like you're going to Form 4 next year and D- is what you have. And so sometimes I look at children who are struggling with poor grades and I'm like, I feel you. I look at probably a child who is struggling with poor self-esteem. I look at even children who look like of outwardly, they look like they got it. But inwardly, they're actually children who are hurting. And I'm just like, I feel you. And so for me, 27th December was very significant, because that is the day I had suicide ideation. I had my plan laid out. I was just like, it's been real. It seems like I'm not making it. And I remember I was with a relative. I was at a relative's house. So you remember in the past, there was no therapy. Yeah, ukisumbua, you're taken to a relative who is strict and will just give you the peace of mind. Yeah, so I had that auntie. And so I was sent to exile to go and live with her in a village. Hakuna steamer, there is no water, piped water, and she had a borehole outside her house. And I remember just staying there for Christmas. It was very boring. There was just a sense of emptiness and despair in my life, and feeling like I'm a failure, and just feeling like nobody wants me. That is why I'm actually here. And there are so many things that children tell themselves, just like I was. And sometimes we don't remember and we don't realize, we don't even process it later in adulthood. In a way, I'm still 40. Probably I'm even leading an organization, but I keep on still feeling rejected. I keep on feeling like nobody wants me. Nobody cares about me. It's like my insecurities still play out. And so for me, being that 15-year-old, and that night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was just like, today, when my auntie sleeps, I'll go and dunk myself in that borehole. And I actually woke up and walked towards that borehole. And then I stood there for a while. I just allowed my life to reel before my eyes in terms of I'm useless. Look at my grades. Look at my parents, the way they're disappointed in me because they said it so many times. And I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. But then nikachungulia, and then I was like, sasa nikianguka watanitoa aje? I mean, I will be so dead. But just that part, and I usually think like that was God's redemption for me. And you can imagine that is 25 years ago today. And to just imagine how there was such a turnaround. First of all, I usually say, for me, I was rescued by God that night. But then there was such a trajectory change in my life. In a way, my grades miraculously improved. What happened that night when I lost the courage to dunk myself in there, I went back to my room and really broke down. And I remember just saying, God help me, God help me. I was feeling so much despair. You know the way you cry until you're still heaving in the morning? That is the kind of an emotion I experienced. But when I woke up, there was so much hope and just looking up. And what that has done to me, probably just looking at my healing journey, my recovering journey, my restoration journey, was for 25 years up to now, looking back at everything that God has done in my life. And every time I usually remind myself, do you know what? Without God, I'm that 15-year-old suicidal teenager. And I've gotten here, I've achieved all these things, I've traveled, I've written books, I've been featured in prominent spaces. And every time I am there, and sometimes I will feel like, should I be here? I remind myself, you're that 15-year-old suicidal teenager that God had mercy on. And it really humbles me. And that is where my passion for journeying with urban families, because those are my main clients, comes from. to just understand the dynamics are difficult. And one of the things is for everyone to keep on doing the deep work, because all of us have childhood experience that probably are less unpleasant, traumatic, maybe even things that we never made sense of. And of course, growing up in African families, we also grew up in places where nobody asked you for your opinion. You are not able to process what you're feeling or thinking. Especially children, they were not invited to the table to give their opinions. And so to just ask yourself, what did that do to me? How is it affecting how I'm leading?
Well, thank you for that. Now, at what point then would you say was that just made the difference? Because something needed to have just happened. Yes, God works in mysterious ways. But were you then understood by this auntie? Suddenly she knew, we used to call them what? Mtoto mtukutu.
Mtundu.
Mtundu.
Yeah.
You know, the difficult one.
Yeah, yeah.
And then suddenly you change and they wonder, okay, how you've changed for the better, and they can't believe it. How do you reintegrate yourself back in and for others to realize that, yes, now you're on a different trajectory? How was that reception like?
So let's just say, first of all, many perspectives that we usually have about ourselves, especially when we're going through such a crisis, is also wrong perceptions of me and wrong perceptions of others. And I love talking about the power of self-talk. Because the moment I've talked to myself and I'm like, nobody wants me, nobody likes me, nobody cares about me. And there's so many times, especially children struggle with those. It's just like false mindsets and just wrong perspective of others and also of myself, and just feeling like I'm useless. You can imagine all the conversations I had even about myself. I'll never make it. But what happens is that night, the miracle of redemption and waking up and feeling so peaceful and just feeling like there's something that has lifted off from my life. And then going back to school, of course, I was this notorious girl, and all of a sudden I'm going to tell the CU people, by then niliokoka. They were like, who prayed for you? I was like, niliokoka too, like usiku. And then I didn't give them the details. They were like, no, we need to pray for you again. We know you, Paps. I used to be called Papi in high school. We know you. You know, I was just those people who used to make fun of CU people. I was difficult to evangelize to. And so they were just like, we need to pray for you again. And then God giving me community, you know, in terms of just positive friends. And you can't believe that by the end of that 1 year, first of all, my ambition for that night when the Lord just came through for me, I told God, if you give me a C+, hata sitaki mambo mingi, C+, I will serve you for the rest of my life. You know, those exam prayers that we make. And God was merciful. Do you know I got a C+? That was a turnaround within 1 year. Even my parents couldn't believe it. From a D- to a C+ in 12 months. And with what that did, first of all, just having positive spaces, probably trusting in God more when probably I was in Form 4, having friends who are positive and encouraging in terms of Papi twende tukasome. I've never forgotten Grace Nderito. I don't know where she is, but sometimes in our stories, there's usually one hero, and Grace Nderito was that person. Twende tukasome, twende CU, twende prayers. So just my company changing. And of course, my parents could see. Like in terms of maybe I was less argumentative. They started getting better reports on me in school, and just seeing also my positive outlook towards life, because now I was depending on God more than just feeling the brokenness and the hopelessness that I was experiencing. And I think what that did, when now I cleared high school, of course, now all my relatives could see the transformation, my friends, my teachers, they could just see there's something that has shifted in Paps. And honestly, for me, that was a miracle. That is why sometimes when I look back at my life, I just keep on seeing God's handprints. When all good things happen, when I'm doing my book launches, when I'm traveling, I just keep on seeing that God did this, because I just look at myself and I'm like, this couldn't be Paps. And then I never considered myself a brilliant person, because you remember how my grades were. So whenever I see any achievement that is beyond my intellectual capacity, I just keep on seeing God, because I just know that 15-year-old, I was a D- kind of a student. You know, so she can't just have woken up and things shifted. And then, of course, looking back and seeing myself later, it's now the assignment that God had for me from that. Because when I left high school and came out here, I was like, by the way, nani anakuanga hapo kusaidia teenagers? Because in my time in school, there were no counselors who used to come, apart from preachers that sometimes I had a bad attitude towards, you know, on Sundays. And it was an AIC church, so probably not so adventurous. And looking back, I'm just like, I got this burden because of what I went through. I just imagine maybe I wouldn't be caring about all these things that I do. Maybe the leadership places I'm in if I didn't go through what I went through. So it built empathy and also a sense of purpose and assignment.
Well, no pun intended, but with that D minus, do you know you could have been a governor in Kenya today? And in that WhatsApp group, you'll not be the only one.
I know.
There are enough of them.
Should I take my chances? Well, at least it became a C+. That is why I became a bit more ambitious anyway. Not like D minus is not an ambition place. Yeah.
Now let's talk about the concept of butterflies towards horizon. Because off the set, the butterfly and the Gen Zs and others with ChatGPT, there are some creatures called butterflies. Google.
Yeah, there are no butterflies in Nairobi, right? But there's a time there were some white butterflies that were all over the place.
But they can go to Karura Forest and other places. They're likely to get. So let's unpack this concept of butterflies towards horizon on Leading Generations book that you have to bring that, unpack that concept. Why butterflies?
Why butterflies? I think I need to use this. Of course, this was the first edition of the book. So what happened, we went to Rwanda for a mission last month, and then we gave away all the books. So in the morning, I didn't have another book to bring along because we are doing a reprint. So this is Leading Change, but it's Leading Generations. And it's a handbook for mentoring 21st century preteens and teens in Africa. So when you look at this, there are butterflies here and they're going towards the horizon. And they're coming from this place. Maybe this is the place of refreshment and nurturing, which is the nectar. And one of the problems when you're thinking about ourselves as leaders, especially in the family space, is to just remember that there is no butterfly that gives birth to a butterfly. Butterflies lay eggs. And then those eggs, they keep on metamorphosizing. Hey, how did I say that? Metamorphosis.
That one.
That thing.
Yes.
And so they keep on going into the different stages. You know, the chrysalis, and then the caterpillar, and then go into the cocoon. And then one day a butterfly comes. And you know, when you're thinking about leadership in that space, there's nobody who ever gets the finished products. We're always working with raw materials. And it is so frustrating. First of all, because they're not as fast as I am. And I also think sometimes the caterpillars usually remind me of my own vulnerability. Sometimes even when I'm raising my children and they're struggling with grades, they can actually trigger that part of me of, you can't fail, I was a failure, you know? But it's because they are caterpillars. They are still larvae.
They're still going through the
They're
process.
still evolving, you know,
Yeah.
but I want them to be where I am. And sometimes the journey of even mentoring people, even in workplaces, they come in as eggs, you know, and then that process of leading them. And sometimes they trigger me because they remind me of my unhealed places. They remind me of my insecurities. And that is why our program called Leading Change, which is about working with mentors and parents who usually have that perspective of you need to be conscious of your own wounds and places that you're not healed because other people will keep on triggering them. For example, you'll think of a teacher in class and then you have this child who is opinionated and they look like they're challenging you. You know why you react? It's because they trigger insecurities in you. You don't think of them as amazing leaders, you know. This child is going somewhere, you actually think like, you're challenging me. So you make it about you. And so to be able to understand that my responsibility is to nurture and then release. And sometimes they will go to a further horizon than me. They'll become better than me. You know, from me, better people will come in terms of, it's like every generation keeps on evolving. You know, the teacher is the one who will bring out the doctors, the engineers, the presidents, the global leaders, the C-suite kind of CEOs. All of them come through the teacher. And so it's the humble job of, I love that perspective of Mary and Elizabeth, and it's like Elizabeth calling Mary the mother of my Lord. You know, it's like whatever you are carrying is actually what I will serve. And so being able to appreciate and to call out that potential in people who are even younger than us, and people who are upcoming, and people who have potential much as they are still pupa and larvae and caterpillars, to just keep on looking forward to the butterfly. And so your work is to just keep on leading them to the horizon. And you cannot control this horizon. You don't know where they are going. You know, the only thing we see is potential, but you don't know. And I really love this concept of Joel 2:28. That in the last days, you know, I will pour out my spirit to all men. And then I love this part of your sons and daughters will see visions, you know, and they will also prophesy. Your young men and women will prophesy. And what that is I always think about it from the perspective of the next generation is always prophetic. It's like they have pictures of the future that are more clearer than the previous generations. It's like they have inside information, they have intel. When you think about even the time of the Wright brothers, making the plane and deciding they'll fly, they looked crazy, just like Joseph. You can imagine the things that Joseph was dreaming about were actually pictures of his future. The wheat. I can imagine probably the Israelites were shepherds, and so they had never seen, by then there was no Instagram and Pinterest. So wako wameona venye wheat huwa inakaa ikiwa kwa shamba. And that is why they thought he was crazy, because those were pictures of the future. He was prophetic. And when he's dreaming about the sun, the moon, and the stars, those are the symbols of Egypt up to now. And so they were pictures of the future. And that is why sometimes there's such a disconnect in generations when you don't understand that your old men will dream dreams, but your young men will see visions. And so the visionary people are the ones who can see beyond the horizon. I know we have this popular African saying of, an old man seated on a chair sees further from a boy who is on top of a tree. But there's also that part of God entrusting his pictures and what he wants to do in the next generation. So when you look at our Gen Zs and how they're going wild, they have a picture that the previous generations don't have, or how things should be. And they actually have this conviction that it is possible. That world actually exists. Just like Martin Luther woke up one day and he was like, I have a dream. God will always trigger a generation whenever he wants to do something. And that is why leading generation is not controlling them, it's ushering them into that horizon that they see. Because it's about them, it's not about me. And it's about God's story, not my own story.
Yeah. And now in this space that we're in this world that we're in, when you talk of the next generation, when we're growing up, we're told leaders of tomorrow.
Bado tunangojea.
Even today, there's still tomorrow. Tunangojea bado. But just to appreciate also that the different generations are, in a sense, passing the baton, so to speak. You have a sense of continuum, continuity in how we coexist. But then there has to be leadership. There are those who step out. But can I suggest to us that the older folk, the older generation, can be stereotyped in wanting to feel that threatened? You want the status quo, you want the ideal, but you're not ready to also submit. Where's the place of humility, understanding, and God in all this discussion, and looking at where we are as a country today?
I think for me, first of all, we are living in a dispensation where, wisdom is not limited into age. Wisdom has become very fluid. Let me say, first of all, knowledge. Knowledge is fluid. And so there's actually an exchange where we can learn from each other. I've had the privilege of being taught by Gen Z so many things, and even allowing them to lead in some spaces because they are better than me in those spaces. So for example, when we are doing our children's programs, they will do the team building better. Because they have these amazing ideas, they are agile, they can move around. I just want to break my bones trying to run after the 11-year-olds, And so they have wisdom. When you listen to them, they have amazing ideas because, first of all, right now, the future is tech. We are living in AI.
And the future
they
is
understand
now.
It more.
Is here.
Yeah. And they understand it more. Actually, COVID accelerated, the industrial revolution in a way. We are in a totally new dispensation. And what happens, they catch up quickly. And so that is why when I lean in on that strength, I'm actually becoming smarter. But at the same time, I also have my wisdom of being someone who is probably didn't grow up in mental health crisis. In a way, I'm able to bring that aspect of slow down, that aspect of mindful living, that aspect of also discipleship. In terms of probably for us, we also read the hard Bible. We didn't Google each verse that we wanted. We probably discovered the whole truth. I remember reading the whole Bible in Swahili when I was 12.
Wow.
Kwa hivyo nataka nianze kuongea Kiswahili ama vipi?
Utanipoteza.
And so just imagining that every generation has its own beauty. For example, when you think about the silent generation, they had their own beauty in terms of just being a generation that will even think before they speak. They're very reflective, they are deep. And then thinking about the baby boomers, probably that is the generation that had the most integrity, even in terms of leadership, especially when they were younger. They had ambitions, yes, but their ambitions were not an overkill of, I will override everyone to get what I want. The ambitions were well-paced. they were ethical in terms of how they work, more than probably the generations that came after. And then we had Gen X, and Gen X were the children of baby boomers and silent generation. And maybe that is the first generation that was probably ambitious about career. That is why they are very proud of their achievements, you know. For them, they even value, they don't value probably being in one corporate for a long time, but they value the experience they have. You know, I'm an accountant.
You're talking to some of them here.
Oh, you're feeling tagged. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the things about Gen X, they're also the people who started valuing work-life balance. You know, like that is ingrained in them. The previous generations cared about family. They will actually go home at 5. And then we have millennials who are home, but they're not home. You know, tunakuanga nyumbani lakini tu tuko hapa.
Uko lakini uko.
Yeah, I remember even myself when my daughter was young, sometimes I'll just be online, selling things, scrolling, looking for motherhood wisdom instead of
You're
mothering
present,
her.
but you're absent.
Bado tu uko hapo unatafuta ujanja.
Ndio hiyo.
But upractice ujanja yenye iko ndani yako. And of course, when you think about it, it's just how the different generations have their own beauty. For example, millennials, are at least we are balanced. We are able to live between the two divides where we grew up without tech, much of it, because tech came when we were teenagers. At least the Sagem. You remember Sagem?
Yes.
Na ile story, ile game ya snakes kwa Nokia?
Yes.
Which Nokia was that? 1127 ama?
Wait, it's
That one.
You know.
Yeah. And then, of course, now you think about the Gen Z, and they have been born in technology. And sometimes I've worked with Gen Zs, and you just admire how they would always get solutions online for everything. They are self-taught. When they are stuck on something, they just need to go and watch the how-to of that thing, and they come and solve it. So when you look at them, if we are thinking about intergenerational dependence, then we see ourselves as a team instead of competitors. And then you realize there is no generation that is irrelevant. You know, every generation has its own wisdom that is unique to them. And I really love that even in generation, God actually acknowledges generation. People from every tongue and from generation to generation, they will worship together. And so there's that picture. And I love it that sometimes church gives us that expression of seeing a grandmother. You know, like it's like we have all those generations meeting together every Sunday. We have a baby boomer, we have silent generation, and especially in the mainstream churches. Everybody is present, and we are worshiping God together, meaning that we still find a common identity in many things. All of us value relationships. And of course, when you're thinking about even communication, yeah, the silent generation and probably the baby boomers, they will prefer letters. Yeah, if you can be able to write. They will prefer one-on-one. They love physical meetings. My mother is a baby boomer. She's like, unakuja siku gani? I mean, I'm like, Mom, we talked yesterday. No, I'm talking about coming.
I want to see you in person.
Yeah, she lives in Boro. And so I have to make time to go and see her because that is her heart language.
That's how you connect.
You know? But then there's a sister who says, by the case important, usini call. Just chat me. You know? She usually says she's Gen Z in her heart. You know? And of course, Gen Zs will prefer a text, maybe even a voice note. And then they'll come back to you later once they've processed, you know. But for us, we just come and talk, we disagree, and that is what probably it was all about. And then now the generations that value phone conversations, like maybe Gen X, do you love phone calls? Or you also prefer chat? Maybe you are also a Gen Z at heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so when you look at the different dynamics of how every generation comes together, it's just about honoring one another and be able to see, when I look at Edmund, I'm like, what can I learn from you? You know, you've been here for longer. There must be something that you've done right to be this, to be where you are. First of all, when you look at life expectancy, even for Gen Z, it's a bit lower, you know, because of the stresses and the mental stress. And I remember a psychological feature or research that I was doing, that right now the mental health of a 5-year-old, it's like a parent who was in asylum 100 years ago.
Wow.
Like the brain mass. When you're investigating how the brain composition looks like. A patient who was in asylum 100 years ago was actually in that state. And so it means that they are overstimulated. Of course, they are also stressed because of too much intake of information. They have overloads and overwhelms, you know, that probably the other generations never experienced. Can you imagine some of the things that Gen Zs talk about? Baby boomers never experienced that.
Totally clueless.
Totally. And even right now, they're not attached to their phone. They keep on forgetting even where they left their phone sometimes, especially the silent generation. They even prefer Kabambe because it's easy to use. Like my husband's grandfather, the silent generation. And he prefers, you know, a simple phone, I remember he didn't have a phone for a long while. It used to be like, yeah, please take that phone to Guka so that I can talk to him. Actually, when I got married there, that is when I was like, Guka, you can't stay without a phone. Ish. Yeah, this is 21st century. And they were saying like, maybe he was just embarrassed that you're not from this family and you're insisting. But he had been without a phone and he was okay.
He was okay.
You know, his life was moving. He was doing everything he needed to do. He's in business. He sells his milk. You know, he takes care of his cows. I mean, he needs a phone for what? Whoever wants to look for me, you guys can just come and give me a phone. And you see, that is still a peace of mind. When you compare with Gen Z, who you have anxiety when you don't have your phone. You know, it's like your whole world is there.
Like they say, they fear marriage.
Oh, yeah, that is the other thing. They fear commitment.
Commitment.
Yeah, you're just like, I would rather have the milk but not the cow.
And they fear when the percentage battery on the phone is showing 3%.
That is a higher risk. It's like that should be insured. You know, have 5 power banks.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, it's just the different priorities, and all these priorities, to some extent, they have good justifications. And so the intergenerational learning is what brings us to that place where there's
but
life
now,
in abundance.
as you're leading your generation, I'd like you to speak to the constant that is there in terms of the spirituality, because then even as we evolve, I mean, with all this tech where we are and we think we're really advanced, to God, the Creator, we've barely scratched the surface. Imagine. So what is it that must be consistent, and how do you assist in this journey in leading a generation?
So I think one of the things that must be consistent through all generations is values. You know, I've gone to the village sometimes and I will see how people are disappointed that my children can't speak good Kikuyu. And I'm like, sometimes I think they speak words, but I'm just like, will they really need Kikuyu 50 years from now? Will that matter which tribe you come from? Because they are a global kind of citizens. But one of the things that I usually say, if there's any culture I would want my children to learn, is God's culture. Because that one is eternal. You know, every generation, the Bible says in Romans 8, the creation is awaiting for the manifestation of the sons of God. It's actually in travailing as it looks forward and longs for the manifestation of the sons of God. And how will the sons be manifested? Of course, they will be in that place of being prophetic. They'll be in that place of having pictures of God's assignment for them. And when you think about it, it's that picture of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because those are like Gen Zs. You know, they were actually going and they're like, we are not bowing down. You know, let it be known to you, O king. Like they will challenge the king. The king Nebuchadnezzar had never seen that banner. He was like, make it 7 times hotter. You know, throw them in that fiery furnace. And I believe that when we have managed to raise that generation, sometimes people underestimate the mothers and the fathers of those 3 boys. Nobody mentions them. Nobody gives them enough credit. They came from families. And you see, for them, they were not expatriates, you know, working for the UN in Babylon. They were actually slaves. They had been taken in forcefully. They were there out of their, like it was not out of their will. They were there out of probably a forced situation. And they were actually chosen. You know, they were supposed to be this and this and this. There was even a profile. There was a CV for the people who will be brought into slavery there. But there were still children who lived on their convictions. And for me, I believe values is one thing that would always keep on driving the next generation, no matter what technological advances happen. So long as there is values, so long as there is integrity, so long as there is that fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom in every generation, then we are sure that our children, no matter what, how the world advances and evil is probably on Pentium 10, our children will still turn out well. And for me, I feel like the assignment is to make sure that we are leading generations by making sure I'm doing my best in my own backyard, and then I release them. Because they're here for God's assignment. I can't keep on overprotecting my children. Even, for example, parents who usually feel like you want your child to probably grow up without so much knowledge and information. We are also a family that restricts technology in terms of tech exposure. We have timeouts. You know, we have screen-free days where you need to be creative. But these children, their future is in the screen. And sometimes my daughter is like, hey, but mommy, everybody has a phone. I'm like, do you know, we are the only temporary things in your life. Technology will advance more.
Yeah.
You know, probably you guys, your phone will be here. You'll just be tapping it.
As a chip.
Yeah, it will just be a chip. Yeah. Probably your body will be a whole keypad, you know. But we are temporary. And of course, these values that we are imparting in you, this is the only thing that you will carry into the spaces where we will not be in. And so just that understanding, and understanding that our responsibility, even as we pass on the baton, is to pass on, number one, the values. And then, of course, number two, to pass on the good things that we were, in terms of just the stories. Every generation has a story. And that is why it doesn't matter how successful we are, we should always tell the stories.
And authentic stories, not just the edited versions where all fathers were number one in their class until the report forms were discovered.
Until the report form got discovered. And of course, there's also that aspect of, when we are thinking of authentic stories, is to tell people of your struggles. And I think this generation actually values people who share vulnerably, in terms of, I don't have it together. I'm also trusting God. You know, I love one of my friends who told their children one day, she was just like, I was talking to my children and I was telling them, sometimes I feel like I'm not doing so well as a dad. And so those times that you feel like I'm failing, just remember that God is the perfect father. We are looking at him together. You know, he's my father, he's your father. And so every time you feel like I am not adding it up, just remember that God is there for you. And I believe when we think about it from that place where I don't have it together, I don't have to have it together, even with my children. Why are we sometimes burning out and collapsing under exhaustion, and even sometimes violating our own values and ending up in places that don't have integrity, trying to give our children a life that they didn't ask for? You know? And then one day, I have journeyed with parents who are probably very successful, but their children are in rehabs, they are in addictions, you know, their lives are falling apart, they are depressive. And when you trace it back, it's just a parenting journey, because my priorities were not right. I was just feeling like it is more of presence than presence.
Present than presence.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't understand. My children don't care what I have. You know, when a child is 5, they don't care whether they live in Runda or Kibera.
They feel nothing. They're just children.
They don't care that they are on a motorbike or even walking, or they are on a tuk-tuk, or they're in a Range Rover, or they're flying. They don't care. You know, sometimes those are my insecurities that I'm projecting on them in terms of what I think is important to them. And so the moment I am thinking about myself, the other thing that I would probably say in terms of leading generations is reparenting myself. You know, I just remind myself that maybe I was not parented the right way. Maybe I grew up with a lot of childhood traumas, but I owe the next generation wholeness. I can't keep on making excuses for what is not aligned in my life. And that is why self-awareness is non-negotiable if I'm going to lead change. I need to do a lot of self-work in terms of just understand myself a bit more. I need to do a lot of self-reflection. Even just daily ask myself, how did I do today? I need to pause and just take stock. I need to also come from a place of also setting goals in my life, that I have things that drive me, and not just goals in terms of the ambitions I have in life, but even goals on how I hold myself down, on how I keep myself accountable. And so, for example, in our goal setting structures, especially in our work with women, we usually believe in setting holistic goals, and we call it SPICES, and so they're spiritual goals. In terms of how do I build my relationship, not what I do for God, but how I am in God. You know, how is God a priority in my life? In a way, if today there is no church, perhaps and God are in a good space. I need to keep on working on that, and even teach my generations to work on that. All the people I mentor, keep on working on your God space, because so long as you're aligned in God, everything else will find its alignment. You know, you'll go through confusion, you'll get fired, you will go through disappointments in life, you will go through heartbreaks, but so long as you have a place that you're grounded in God, you'll be able to bounce back. I can't control what will happen to you, but I can teach you how to allow God to work everything together for your good. And the number 2 is physical. We're actually a generation that has probably a higher mortality rate, and it's because of probably lifestyle-related issues. In terms of we're not moving our bodies, it's from one Uber to another. We are driving everywhere. We don't walk long distances because we are light matatu, we enter into our homes. You know, we have this convenience culture. We are also not eating healthy. We are not hydrating enough. We are not even getting sunshine. We are not sleeping because I am under the cover with my phone. You know, so I always have the blue light effect, the white light effect in my eyes. And even my mind is overstimulated. I'm not able to sleep as soon as I get to the bed. You know, I don't have quality of sleep. When I wake up in the morning, I'm always tired, and so it also affects my performance during the day, and then I start feeling more horrible about myself. And so my stress build-up is just there. It's also on the physicality. First of all, am I leading my children by my habits? You know, is it a family culture we have? Because they will never start all of a sudden liking broccoli when they are 30 because the doctor said. Those are habits that we build up, and especially the why. And just having family cultures that are interesting, because all this needs to come back to family. How many times are we doing the eat outs, even as a family, because we are too busy? And so leading change in terms of how we are eating. And then, of course, leading change in intellectual to just say, is everybody living out their brilliance in this family? Do we know how you are gifted and how you're gifted and how you're gifted? Are we pushing each other gifts forward? So, for example, in our family, we discovered that our daughter is the one who has higher compassion level. So we allow her to choose probably a children's home that we will visit, and we allow her, we support her to do things that are leveraging on her compassion, you know? And so anything that has to do with that, we just like, yeah, please
You
go
encourage
and do the
support.
Deto Heart Run.
Yeah.
Go and do the other thing, because we want to build up that thing and nurture it that we see in you. And I believe just being able to identify the intellectual power of our children, because we are living in a generation where grades don't matter anymore. It's actually the man's gift will make him great and bring him before great men. That is the philosophy of life in our generation. And so to just being able to see every child and bringing out their giftedness instead of just forcing them on grades. You know, the children will never get A's, and I am one of those. But they can still achieve their purpose in life because God's plan is bigger than their grades. But at the same time, intellectual is making sure that my child is living their best life, and even the people I'm mentoring are living their best life. Like every gift is functioning. And then, of course, also commercially to teach children to have a good relationship with money. The next generation. Because remember, we are living in an age of covetousness and an age of the mammon spirit has taken over people. It's about how much I make. It's about the bigger and the shinier thing. Yeah, but people sometimes don't think that what is the use of the man gaining the whole world and losing his soul?
Yeah.
You know, because so many people have lost their souls. And just sitting in sessions, in coaching sessions, I've seen so many people who have everything, but they're miserable, they're depressed. They're feeling vanity of vanities like Solomon. And so that reality is to teach your children, you know, to first of all, who they need to be before what they need to have. Because who they need to be will always regulate them. The Spirit of God will be like, you're going too fast and too far there. You know, just come back. Who you are is more important than what you have. And of course, what you're building. God cares about who you are more than probably how you want to be perceived. And then, of course, there's also the aspect of the emotional, to just teach emotional resilience, especially to the next generation, in terms of the, first of all, growth mindset. You know, one of the things of the fixes of technology, sometimes it doesn't give you the resilience of hard work and solving things, sometimes problem-solving skills, because if technology can't help, then you're totally stuck. But there's that resilience that Edmund grew up with, trying to fix the spikes of a bike in the village. You know, you learned patience, you learned focus, you know, you learned how to slow down, you learned how to do nothing and not feel bad, you know, because those rhythms of rest are needful for recovery in life. That is why Jesus also had Sabbaths. He used to go and chill at Lazarus' houses. That is why he used to go for vacay.
Yes.
Yeah, so anataka kubangaiza, he will just go and hang out with those guys. You know, he had rhythms in his life. He had rhythms of solitude. We don't understand that that is actually a rhythm that is supposed to heal us. To spend time with yourself.
Yes,
and with
indeed.
yourself is not with your phone, with yourself.
With yourself.
And you spend time with your thoughts. You sit down with yourself. You know, like personally, one of the things I learned when, well, I was never a Gen Z, but in my early 20s, was to retreat for 3 days every 3 months. Just spend time with myself and ask God, how am I doing? You know, what can I do better? Or what should I focus on in the next 3 months? And that really helped me to probably stay focused. And that is why in our campus conversations with students, we usually talk about decades of decisions. That from when you're 18 to 28, that is when you'll make all the decisions that will affect the rest of your life. And why? It's because during that time, that is when you would make decisions on career. So if you settle on the wrong career, you will now be rerouting in your 30s, trying to go back to the place that is your fit. And that is academic wastage. And then you will also be making decisions about money. You know, because your money habits, if probably that is the time that you partied hard. Like I remember meeting one lady who was in her 27 and she was like, do you know I squandered 3 million within 4 months?
Wow.
Like their mother had taken this, you know, this investment policy and then it matured. The mother had passed away a long time after that. Can you imagine? She was like, I squandered 3 million in 4 months. You know? Can you imagine if too in her decade of decisions? Because you can imagine what if she'd invested even 1 million.
Oh.
And then she put it in the money markets. You know, like every year she would have 100K.
Easily.
Easy money. But you see, now that is when you learn to understand what are the good financial habits. And of course, now that emotional stability also happens in that space, in terms of teaching them resilience and just teaching them also to process things instead of stuffing it down. Yeah, because I think when we went to Rwanda, we were actually doing a kids program, and we were just like, these children are so angry. They are so angry. And especially children who've grown up in places where anger was not welcome and so it was suppressed. Or maybe, do you know there's a verse in Proverbs that says, do not walk with an angry man lest you learn his ways.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Anger can actually be social in terms of we react this way.
You can transmit
whatever
it.
reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we overreact because that is what we learned. It's a learned behavior. It doesn't mean that probably you are traumatized or anything. And so as you journey together, just remember that their emotional health and especially emotional intelligence is something that is paying higher than IQ in this generation. Yeah. People
as we now seek to land this plane, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Yes.
The Gen Zs, the fear is gone.
The fear of people is gone.
And they will not believe. What would be advised to them? And us as a nation, because we've spoken to the heart in terms of the software side of things, that you cannot legislate values.
Oh yeah.
So even as we're going through this vetting drama, I'm doing it for the tick, for the show, but
yes.
Is it
Will it
real?
change the hearts? Yeah. I think for me, when it comes to the space of God, that is why I was talking about the spiritual space. It's teaching relationship over religion. You know, to teach people to the reality of God, not just the head knowledge about God. You know, it's the way Job said, I used to hear about you, but now I know you. I think until people get to that place where you know God is a reality to you. Like personally, when I was a 15-year-old and I experienced God, I mean, nobody has needed to preach to me these 25 years. I just had a quest and a hunger to want more of that. And I think when we think about probably discipleship, even in workplaces, I was actually very impressed to meet a CEO who has a tech company. And in his company, there is a requirement that when you are a newly hired staff, you have to come physically. And they have a devotion every morning. And with time, you must lead the devotion.
Oh, yes, you get opportunity and you have to.
Yeah. And he was like, their lives started turning around in terms of they were drinking, with time they stopped. They were having relational issues. Some of them had struggles with their families of origin. With time, you keep on addressing those because those are discipleship needs. When people are even coming from families that they don't want to see my mother, cut off toxic people, those are discipleship needs. And you can only do it when you're thinking of a journey, not a preaching.
Exactly.
It's not a good preaching, it's a journey. And I think Gen Zs want discipleship. They don't want sermons. Hold my hand. Let's walk a journey. This is where I'm struggling. Give me some wisdom and insight about it. And sometimes tell me you don't know.
It's okay.
Allow me to discover it for myself and allow God to reveal his truth to me. You know, and so for me, I'm feeling like we need to lead people to their own truth, not force our own truth to them. It's not about my revelations. It's about helping them discover their own revelations. That is what will ground them, and that is what will lead generations. And the Bible says also that they will write the name of God on their foreheads, and they will say that I belong to God. I think until that happens, and they are proud of God being their God, and it's because they have a relationship, not religion, then the battle still goes on.
Paint a picture as we land this plane. We're in Kenya. What do you see when you look in the crystal ball? Prophetic, 5 years, 10 years, the future. What do you see in terms of leading your generation, our time? Because not the next, like it's yet to come, it is here with us. What do you see? What do you hope for? What do you pray for?
I think for me, one of the visions I have for this generation is first of all for people to first of all fully get in touch with themselves, not to be outwardly looking. I mean, we are scrolling down too much and information of other people, other people's ideas, other people's revelations, even in terms of devotion. is it possible for me to sit still and allow God to speak to me about that struggle I'm going through instead of looking for a sermon and a TED talk that is addressing that situation? I think until we are thinking about ourselves as revelational people in how we are living, even as a nation, in terms of I want God to speak to me about my role and how he wants me to run my relay, so that when I'm passing on the baton, I passed it from truth, not just information. And then the other thing that I also envision for this generation is just being full of the Spirit of God. Because the Bible says the Holy Spirit will lead us to all truths. You know, there are so many things. Sometimes even the things that are posted, you need to ask yourself, is this true? Mm-hmm. Is this true? Because it's only the truth that will set you free. And it is the truth that you know, that you've interacted with, that you have conviction about. It's not Edmund's truth, it's Paps's truth that God has revealed to her that will bring freedom into her own life. And then to also remember that everybody comes from a family. By the end of the day, the president, the governors. And so that is why if we can put good work in families, if families can be the place where discipleship is happening, and people also have self-awareness as a family. Actually, we are coming to a place of encouraging even families to do gift assessments, to do personality tests, to do even things like love language tests, so that we just be able to love each other well. And that means that when I'm released from that family, I will go and love other people well. That is my vision for the urban families in Africa.
Indeed. Rest assured, even with that D, ungekuwa governor today. No pun intended.
So should I apply? Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Yeah. It's been insightful. It's been authentic. And we value you for the privilege of your time. I'm Edmund Mudibo. Let's do this. Same place, next time. God bless.